Hello listener, the Nameless Scholar here, and today we will be looking at the Iron Warriors. Known for their mastery at siegecraft, both in defense and assault, they are the grim, cold-hearted masters of the science of war amongst the Space Marines, exemplars of strength and discipline turned exclusively to the systematic destruction of an enemy. Commanded by its Primarch Perturabo as an extension of his mind and body, the will of each legionary utterly sublimated to his conception of victory. The Iron Warriors have garnered a reputation for ruthlessness and as master strategists, and are very adept at tearing down every impregnable fortress or unassailable citadel that dares to defy the Emperor's will. Armored with a suspicion born of bitter experience, the Iron Warriors have often been labeled paranoid, but as the events of the Dornian Heresy proved, not even Brother Astartes can be trusted implicitly. As consummate siege masters, they were instrumental in the success of the Great Crusade, and after the betrayal they refortified the Imperium to withstand assaults from within as well as without. While the other legions placed their trust in dangerous psychic powers or the superstition of blind faith, the Iron Warriors depend instead upon thick walls, overwhelming firepower, and meticulous planning to ensure victory. The Emperor created the Primarchs to be paragons of humanity that would lead his armies of conquest, and sensing the threat they posed, the Chaos Gods scattered the infants throughout the galaxy. It is a testament to their Emperor-given abilities and strength of will that in most cases, they rose to positions of power within their respective societies. In his Speculum Historiale, Caprinus famously proposed that the character of each of the Primarchs had been shaped by the cultures in which they were raised, with special mention made of Perturabo and the world of his youth. Olympia was a world divided into mountainous city-states, with open conflict held in check by the heavy fortifications and strong defenses that had been honed over the centuries. By the time the Emperor reached Olympia, Perturabo had risen to command the armies of Locos, one of the city-states. His innate skills allowed him to not only mastermind the successful invasion of the several neighboring city-states, breaking hundreds of years of stalemates, but also to confound the preemptive strikes from those who feared they would be next. Perturabo was a genius in the arts of siegecraft, but when it came to matters of human interaction, he was cold and detached. All through his youth he had been plagued by loneliness and haunted by the mystery of his own origins. This disconnection was not evident when he was first reunited with his true father, the Emperor. Instantly recognizing the bond between them, and finally able to discover the reason for his existence, Perturabo greeted him with a warmth he had not realized was possible. As they talked, Perturabo came to his father's Great Crusade as more than just an exercise in toppling the defenses of worlds that opposed them, but as a means of bringing rationalism and enlightenment to a galaxy mired in superstition. As the first step, the Emperor gifted him the 4th Legion of Adeptus Astartes and made him unify Olympia under his command. The former rulers of the city-states were outraged to find themselves reduced to the status of vassals, but under the circumstances, they were powerless to prevent it. Perturabo remolded the Iron Warriors to his own ideals, but in speaking with his tech marines, it became apparent that there was still much for him to learn. While his legion prepared, Perturabo undertook a journey to the tech adepts of Mars, that for less of a rationalist might have been called a pilgrimage. He amazed the Maros with his powers of analytical reason and absorbed the accumulated wisdom of the Red Planet at an astonishing rate. Mars became almost a second home to Perturabo, but eventually the time came for him to apply all he had learned in the Great Crusade. Perturabo had trained his legion well, and the Iron Warriors' abilities in combat engineering and siege warfare made them highly effective at bringing worlds into the burgeoning Imperium. Seemingly without effort, they were able to determine the most efficient route to circumvent enemy defenses and bring their bastions crashing down. While the Iron Warriors became essential to the continuous momentum of the Great Crusade, their reserved demeanor meant that all too frequently the credit for their efforts was claimed by others. Perturabo had little need for glory, but he recognized the damaging effect this was having on the morale and effectiveness of his battle brothers, who did not share his level of clinical detachment. This frustration may have played a part in turning the rivalry between the Iron Warriors and Rogel Dorn's Imperial Fists from professional disagreements over siege methodology to outright loathing. The campaign on the planet of Skraven had been so hard-fought that 4 Primarchs were present by its conclusion. At the banquet held to celebrate victory, Horus Lupercal of the Luna Wolves warmly praised the Iron Warriors for their achievements, which included the destruction of the final enemy citadel, and proclaimed Perturabo to be the finest exponent of siege warfare in the Imperium. Rogel Dorn, however, disagreed and said that the Imperial Palace on Terra, which he had designed and his Imperial Fists guarded, was impregnable and proof against any attack. Perturabo, with cold logic, pointed out that having studied the blueprints, he had found a number of vulnerabilities that determined attacker could exploit, and further estimated that if the need arose, his Iron Warriors could breach the walls within 2 months. At this, the hall exploded into uproar as the Imperial Fists accused Perturabo of traitorous intent and of plotting to kill the Emperor. Amid accusation and insult, Perturabo's genuine intention to offer suggestions on how the Emperor's security could be improved was drowned out, and only the intervention of Horus and Fulgrim prevented the affair degenerating into bloodshed. Unsurprisingly, Shravan was the last planet on which these 2 legions fought as allies. After many decades of success, the Great Crusade's momentum began to falter. It had pushed out from Terra at such a rate that supply lines had become overstretched and vulnerable. Horus, one of the few Primarchs that Perturabo could truly call a friend, asked for his advice concerning the problem which threatened to stall their progress. He concluded that important strategic worlds were falling prey to raiders or even trying to secede from the Imperium, and that the forces assigned to guard them were unequal to the task. When Horus asked Perturabo for his opinion on the best way to solve these problems, the recommendation was that these strategic worlds be garrisoned by Astartes, and knowing that his legion was by far the best suited for the position, he volunteered his Iron Warriors. While the logic of this was undeniable, it had a disastrous effect on the legion's morale. They became warriors without a war, isolated and spread out thinly across the galaxy in numbers, sometimes as small as a single squad. With supply lines secured, the expeditions moved even further from Terra, which in turn necessitated the creation of ever more garrisons. The number of Iron Warriors remaining on the front lines dwindled to the point where they were unable to operate efficiently on their own, and became increasingly reliant upon others to carry out their battle plans. This came to the fore at Ulanor, where Horus was named War Master of the Great Crusade in the Emperor's stead. This honor was due in part to the unprecedented tally of worlds brought into compliance by the sons of Horus, a number that would not have been nearly as high had it not been for the sacrifice and support of the Iron Warriors. With a brittle calm that belied the tension beneath, Perturabo discussed this with the War Master, using irrefutable logic. He had explained that the garrison worlds had been stabilized to the point where his legion's skills were being wasted. He continued to push, noting the increased resistance being encountered by the expeditions, and that in his opinion, his legion was the best suited to bolster the offensive. In the face of Perturabo's clinical assessment of the situation, Horus relented, and sensing that their hunger for battle could be used for the good of the Great Crusade, he reassigned nearly half of the garrisons to the stewardship of the Imperial Fists. Liberated from the stifling confines of endless garrison duty, the Iron Warriors returned to the front lines with an uncharacteristic enthusiasm. They set out to prove their worth so comprehensively that the War Master would have no choice but to release the other half of their legion from the cleansing of the Hrud Warrens on Gugan, which had resisted Imperial forces for decades, to the toppling of the living crystal fortresses of the Kugi. It seemed as though nothing could stand before their implacable advance. Even the disastrous news that the Ultramarines were poised to secede from the Imperium was taken as a chance to prove their worth. Loath as he was to place his legion under the command of Rogel Dorn, who was to lead the assault, Perturabo pledged the Iron Warriors to the task of bringing Guilliman to heel at Istvan. However, the astropathic message he received in response was as curt as it was cryptic. It simply said, "A legion that cannot even hold its homeworld has no place facing other Astartes." Urgent communications with Olympia did indeed reveal that rioting had broken out all across the planet. Angry mobs roamed freely through the streets, attacking Imperial buildings and calling for the return of independence. It appeared that the former rulers of the city-states had moved from embittered resentfulness to open revolt in their attempts to reclaim power. In the confusion, no one thought to ask how Dorn had known of the riots so quickly, and by the time they did, the heresy had already claimed 3 loyal legions. With their homeworld in rebellion, Perturabo ordered the Iron Warriors to return to Olympia with all haste. While in transit, news reached them from War Master Horus of Dorn's betrayal at Istvan, and of the demonic forces that stood ready to plunge the Imperium into civil war. Though Perturabo was initially dismissive about the existence of such creatures of nightmare, it seemed that their distrust and dislike of Dorn had been well-founded. Only much later, long after the slaughter of the heresy and the Iron Cage Worlds, did the extent of Dorn's plans come to light. Istvan had been designed as a trap to crush the legions Dorn had been unable to convert to the path of the ruinous powers, rather than running the risk of the Iron Warriors seeing Istvan for the ambush it was. Dorn's agents had instead fomented an uprising upon Olympia to draw them far out of the position for the coming war. Thankfully, they had underestimated the strength of the recently reinforced Olympian garrison, which was able to rapidly reimpose order and started rooting out the Chaos demagogues and their misguided followers. Confident in the knowledge that his homeworld was secure, Perturabo redirected the fleet towards the planet he was certain would be Dorn's ultimate destination, Terra. While they had previously been resentful of their garrison worlds, On their journey, it became obvious how effective they were at maintaining order, and of the vital role they played in keeping open the loyalist supply lines. Much less welcome were the garrisons they had only recently vacated in favor of the Imperial Fists, which were performing much the same task for the traitor's cause. There was no time to raise them, but Perturabo vowed to his legion that they would return to reclaim them as soon as Dorn's insurrection had been crushed. Above all things, they must reach Terra and save the Emperor, as to lose him would be to lose everything. This mantra was hardest to bear when they heard the pleas from their allies on Mars. They were under attack not just from their chaos-infected brethren and the fallen Titan legions, but also by the Astartes of the Iron Hands, who it was said they were preparing to unleash some terrible weapon for the depths of the Noctis Labyrinthus. Perturabo yearned to go to Mars, but with the sons of Horus standing ready to make planetfall on Terra, they had no choice. Desperate entreaties from the Mechanicum quickly turned to bitter, angry threats, and the ultimatum that if they did not come immediately, they would be as if dead to the Mechanicum for all eternity. All manner of poisonous accusations were made, calling the Iron Warriors oath-breakers and worse, so that the fleet had long since blocked their frequencies by the time global transmissions from the Red Planet fell ominously silent. Warfare raged across the length and breadth of Terra, but the Iron Warriors were drawn inexorably to the Imperial Palace. It was Dorn's self-proclaimed masterwork of defensive engineering, the trigger for the feud that dated back to Shravan. Now it would be their pleasure to tear it down brick by brick. The War Master had tasked them only with bottling up the traitors inside, which would slow down their progress to gain entry into the Emperor's throne room. The longer the attention was diverted from his real location, the more time the Master of Mankind would have to bring his plans to fruition. Perturabo, however, was not content simply to bombard the palace from afar. He wants to break the walls and prove to Dorn once and for all the superiority of his legion's siegecraft. The Iron Warriors tested the palace's defenses and defenders with vigor, gaining valuable insights about the weakness of the design, but losing many battle brothers in the process. Seeing this, Horus told him to pull back, that these brethren would be needed later. Even Conrad Kurz, half a world away, contacted Perturabo and begged him to withdraw. The Iron Warriors, however, had not turned their backs on liberating the garrison worlds and on their friends in the Mechanicum, only to walk away from confronting their most hated enemy and the chance of ending Dorn's heresy once and for all. On the 55th day of the siege, the Iron Warriors forced a breach in Dorn's supposedly unbreakable palace, and in doing so, proved their superiority to the Imperial Fists in siege warfare. However, their attack was repulsed, though not by Rogel Dorn, but Sanguinius and his Blood Angels. By the end of the battle, hundreds of their brothers lay dead in the rubble, yet none broke their cold hearts as surely as the sight of the shattered body of Perturabo. Devastated by the senseless loss of their Primarch, the Iron Warriors regrouped for yet another assault upon the Ultimate Gate. Ignoring even the orders of War Master Horus, they seemed intent on joining Perturabo in death, and only through the personal intervention of the Emperor himself were the Iron Warriors brought back to their senses. With great reluctance, they withdrew to fortify the center of the Imperial resistance, the Astronomicon. These bulwarks became vital when the traitors breached the walls of the throne room and realized that they had been deceived. The Iron Warriors proved to be as valiant in defense as in attack, and their efforts were pivotal, not just at keeping the traitor legions at bay, but for inflicting horrendous losses upon them in the process. Their technical knowledge was also invaluable in reconfiguring the Astronomicon, first to weaken the demonic legions across Terra, and later, after the conclusion of the heresy, to sustain the critically wounded Emperor in both body and spirit. Although Dorn was dead and his minions in full retreat from Terra, the Chaos Legions were far from a spent force. Brutal internecine struggles still raged across the Imperium, and the fleeing traitor Astartes did all they could to fan the flames as they passed. On some worlds, they paused for longer, creating festering centers of corruption with which to bring down surrounding planets. Worst of all were the worlds firmly garrisoned by the Imperial Fists. Their presence and effect for the traitor cause had been a heavy burden to bear, and so before the embers had been cooled on Terra, the Legion set off to fulfill Perturabo's pledge to reclaim them. Their quest was given fresh urgency by taunting transmissions from these worlds. They told of populations being worked to death as slaves and sacrificed to the dark gods to turn each planet into a fortress. The Legion Master's decision to have each Grand Company simultaneously attack a different world to prevent them from finishing their fortifications was initially welcomed as a bold stroke worthy of Perturabo. In truth, it was simply the action of a man driven by grief and unable to match the skill and judgment of his late Primarch. Each Grand Company had links with a different world, and the arguments over which should be liberated first had threatened to tear the Legion apart. They arrived to discover that they had been misled, and that the fortifications were already complete. Mourning for their lost Primarch had erased all trace of their normal analytical detachment, and so across a dozen worlds, they already depleted Grand Companies walked willingly into the traps that had been set for them. In what became known as the Iron Cage Campaign, the Iron Warriors found themselves embroiled in bloody stalemates. They had insufficient forces to decisively break the enemy's interlocking chaos-enhanced fortifications, and too much pride to withdraw from the field. Time after time they stormed bastions, only to find the enemy had already withdrawn, and that the place they had died to claim had been turned into the next killing ground. While they bore their losses stoically, the frustration at never truly getting to grips with the enemy ate away at them. They were haunted by memories of the siege of the Imperial Palace, where they had broken through at great cost, only to find their most hated enemy nowhere to be found. As the Iron Cage closed ever tighter, the same story was being played out across each planet. By a process of grinding attrition, the Iron Warriors were being driven to the point of extinction. When barely a quarter of their number remained battle ready, the traitor Astartes finally went on the offensive, recognizing their imminent destruction, yet welcoming the chance to finally meet their enemy face to face. Only the timely intervention of Abaddon, leading a coalition of loyal Astartes, prevented their annihilation and broke the Iron Cage. Having resigned himself to his fate, Kruger was surprised to feel the weight of the traitor lift from his chest. Blinking the blood from his eyes, he dimly made out the brutalized corpse of the Imperial Fist, being hauled up and thrown effortlessly to one side. Despite the repainted black Terminator armor, Kruger could not fail to recognize his savior. With a grateful nod, he took Abaddon's proffered hand and rose unsteadily to his feet. Stunned, speechless, he looked out over the battlefield and saw Astartes, bearing the liveries of the Death Guard, Thousand Sons, Knights Lords, Word-Bearers, and Abaddon's renamed Black Templars, falling upon the now embattled Imperial fists and putting them to the sword. With the galaxy ravaged by the devastation of the Dornian Heresy, the Iron Warriors were tasked with refortifying first Terra and then the wider Imperium. They extended and rebuilt the fortifications around the Astronomicon, transforming it into an armored city far more imposing than the old Imperial Palace. Having seen how effective the garrison worlds had been in imposing order, the Legion returned once more to that format. Worlds of strategic importance were chosen, including those guarding the main routes through the Imperium, centers of industrial production, and in particular, the Praesis Fortress worlds which stand sentinel around the Eye of Terror. Bereft of support from the Mechanicum, they instead drew ties from the garrison worlds. This took the form of raw materials, war production, and to help cement the relationship with the planets they were defending, recruits, to ensure the mistake of the Great Crusade was not repeated, where they rapidly found themselves overstretched and isolated. They expanded far above their pre-heresy levels. This was augmented further still with the addition of vast numbers of weapon servitors, war machines, and other, more specialized engines of destruction. This allowed them to be proactive in defense and strike out at enemies before they got an opportunity to attack. Another factor that drove their enemies was that while they appreciated Abaddon's intervention in breaking the Iron Cage, the thought of being beholden in such a way, even to a close ally, now went against their nature. Their distrust is not restricted to their brother Astartes. Such is their disdain of the accuracy of ordnance laid down by the Imperial Army and Navy, and the losses they sustained due to their incompetence, that the creation of their own force of heavy artillery became a high priority. Similarly, the chilly relationship with the Adepts of Mars refused to thaw after the heresy, and if anything grew frostier as the Mechanicum slipped into superstition. To fill the gap, the Iron Warriors built war machines along similar patterns to massive Ordinati, towering Knight-class walkers, and even, it is rumored, Titans. The Adepts of Mars complained bitterly of this, claiming that such things must have been looted, but the Iron Warriors defiantly maintained that they were solely the results of their own ingenuity. While the Legion has certainly been observed to recover damaged Mechanicum assets from the battlefield, such items are always cruciously delivered back to their forged world of origin. Of all the traitor Astartes to plague the Imperium, it is those of the former Imperial fists that draw the majority of the Legion's attention. Whether they call themselves Black Legion, Scions of Dor, or Crimson Fists, the Iron Warriors take every opportunity to engage them. The elusive nature of the Blood Angels has meant that prospects of bringing them conclusively to battle have been all too rare. The exception to this was on Macon in late M37, when they drew the Plague Legion into a trap that resulted in the slaughter of the better part of two great companies, and afforded the Iron Warriors a measure of vengeance for the death of their Primarch. This focus on the Chaos Legions, especially around the Eye of Terror, has come at the expense of the border with Guilliman's Ultramar Segmentum. For all the Legion's size and power, even they cannot effectively garrison its entire length. Worlds under their aegis resist this implacable advance far better than those around them, which has resulted in small, embattled enclaves of the Imperium deep inside Ultramar space. Under the rule of the Iron Warriors, Adamantium and Ceramite join quarried stone to transform Olympia into a fortress world of unprecedented proportions. The original city-states have become towering armored hives dedicated to the sport of the Legion, crowned with void shields and defense lasers. Their summits reach high above the clouds. Competition between hive cities to provide arms, vehicles, and recruits for the Astartes is intense, and not always friendly. Since the uprising at the start of the Dornian Heresy, the population has been subject to strict controls. Anything that might disrupt the smooth running of the planet is ruthlessly suppressed, be it misguided subversives, agents of the ruinous powers, or the excessive rivalry of competing hives. Olympia is at the center of a web of production that stretches clear across the Imperium, with an output to rival some of the larger forged worlds. Ties of raw materials flow in from the garrison worlds, and in return, finely crafted weapons of war pass back to supply the Iron Warriors in their campaigns. To this end, Olympia is encircled with orbiting shipyards, solar collectors, space docks, and defense platforms. The fortified nature of Olympia extends far beyond this, though with fleets of warships, minefields, and early warning systems standing ready to challenge any unauthorized visitor. Addendum number 1. The Alexieri Spaceport. Designed by Perturabo after his first visit to Mars, but not completed until nearly 2,000 years after his death, the Alexieri Spaceport is one of the technological wonders of the Imperium. Sitting as it does in geosynchronous orbit over Mount Anticetus, Olympia's tallest mountain, it is a primary conduit for materials entering and leaving the planets, by lowering adamantium cables through the atmosphere until they reach the base station at the mountain summit. They created elevators able to move bulk goods from orbit to the surface and back in an incredibly efficient manner. Once enclosed and pressurized, the spaceport became in effect the tallest building in the Imperium, boasting a capacity and efficiency far outstripping transport by orbital shuttles. Given its iconic status, its vital industrial role, and the damage caused across Mars when the Uranus Patera orbital elevators were destroyed during the Heresy, the greatest of care is taken to protect this structure from attack. After the horrors of the Iron Cage Worlds, and the shame of being saved by Abaddon's masked crusades, the Iron Warriors resolved never to find themselves in such a position again. To that end, they aggressively recruited, so that their grand companies contained far beyond the 1,000 frontline Astartes they had before the Heresy. Most warsmiths are now able to command at least 5,000 battle brothers, and 20 times that number of servitors. The foundation of each grand company is its armory, and the quality and quantity of its output is a source of great pride, rather than being a separate department. The apothecarian is subservient to the master of the forge, and is responsible as much for creating and maintaining the Legion's army of servitors as for ministering to their Astartes brethren. Their innate suspicion frequently sparks rivalries within the Legion, and competition between lieutenants is positively encouraged by warsmiths, the better to spur them on to greater efforts, and is only reined in when it threatens to become destructive to the Legion. Each lieutenant commands hundreds of marines, squadrons of armored vehicles, and enough artillery pieces to level whole cities. Periodically, these battle-hardened veterans are withdrawn from the front lines to garrison duties, where they are able to refit, repair, and replenish their ranks. The task of protecting their garrison worlds is a vital one, as the ties they bring in are integral to the continued growth of the Iron Warriors. To lose a garrison world is a terrible source of shame, one which a warsmith will go to great lengths to rectify. The death of a warsmith, especially if he has not named a clear successor, is a time of great turmoil as ambition and bitter rivalries come to the fore. On rare occasions, the power struggle is so extreme that the only recourse is to request permission from the Council of Warsmiths to divide the force and create a new Grand Company. This has seen the number of Grand Companies rise beyond their original 12. Although such events are not taken lightly, most potential warsmiths calculate that it is preferable to wait for the tides of battle and mortality to elevate them to command of full strength Grand Company than hastily snatch the reins of a weakened one, with a corresponding vulnerability that would bring. Masters of siege warfare and attrition assault tactics, the Iron Warriors favor the use of murderous firepower as their principal agency of war, and are renowned for their use of heavy armor and fortifications, spurning vainglorious ideals of personal combat and valor for the brutal determination to achieve victory by any means necessary. This culminated in tactical formations such as that which became known as the Hammer of Olympia, designed to carry out an unyielding defense line under a weight of armored warriors and a hurricane of fire. To the uninitiated outsider, the Iron Warriors simply deploy overwhelming firepower to pound their foes into submission before assaulting the survivors. In truth, their approach is far more analytical, subtle, and above all, effective. They retain Perturabo's keen intellect and see the defeat of the enemy as a puzzle to be cracked. In defense, they make great use of fixed positions, bunkers, and heavy gun emplacements so that even a small number of Iron Warriors can effectively defend a large area from attack. Every aspect is optimized to give clear lines of sight and interlocking fields of fire. Terrain, obstacles, and minefields funnel the enemy almost subliminally into optimal killing zones, and the extensive use of high-functioning weapon servitors frees the Astartes themselves to act as a reserve force able to respond to the unexpected and for their inevitable counterstrike. They are also able to rapidly assess a situation and react accordingly. The most famous example was when the infantry of the 3rd Grand Company transformed the shattered outskirts of the Fortuna's Hive City into a killing ground within hours of arrival. This stalled the Greenskin assault long enough for the Iron Warriors to deploy the full might of their arsenal down from orbit and defeat the Horde once and for all. On the attack, they take the same clinical approach. Powerful scans, rolling bombardments, and infiltrating feints probe the enemy's strengths and weaknesses and inform their strategy. Each Grand Company uses a different approach, based upon the guiding philosophy of their warsmith and the equipment in their armory. Most follow the traditional route of a massed armored blitzkrieg of Vindicators and Fellblades. backed up with mechanized infantry in land raiders. The 8th and 30th Grand Companies, however, preferred to circumvent the enemy's defenses entirely, utilizing extensive teleporter arrays or tunneling vehicles respectively to strike at the very heart of the stronghold. Others use even more exotic equipment, such as the massive ordinati of the 6th, 9th and 16th Grand Companies and the mighty Nightwalkers of the 20th that dwarf even dreadnoughts. Before the heresy, the Iron Warriors worked closely with the forces of Mars, with the Scriptorum Maxis on Olympia mentioning many instances of Perturabo going to battle aboard the Corvus assault pod of a warlord Titan. Rumors persist that the First Grand Company still has access to such things, although if they have ever been used, no enemy has ever witnessed it and lived to tell the tale. The Legion is methodical and coldly logical in its approach, and is certain that any problem or obstacle will yield to them in time. The worst tragedies in their history, such as the battle at the Ultimate Gate or the Iron Cage campaign, have occurred when they have embraced passion over reason. Bitter experience has left them mistrustful of others, and in response they have striven to armor themselves against any chance of further betrayal. They remain steadfastly loyal to the Emperor, greatly respecting the rational, secular galaxy he had tried to build, and so have little time for the deification espoused by the word-bearers. Similarly, such esoteric practices as the use of psychic powers are treated with deep distrust, though they grudgingly accept the vital role that astropaths and navigators play in the day-to-day running of the Imperium. The study of such things is seen as an unsuitable vocation for an Iron Warrior. In the absence of psychically talented brother librarians to combat the vials of the demonic and the witch, the Iron Warriors have instead applied their technological skills to the task. For the Grand Companies standing sentinel around the Eye of Terror, the null fields and weaponry from the forges of Olympia are prized above even a plentiful supply of ammunition. These devices are seen as yet another kind of fortress, one which protects them against the insidious denizens and whispered madness of the warp. As well as Perturabo's cold, analytical logic, traits and such as suspicion and even paranoia have been passed on to his Marine. Initially, the gene seed of the Iron Warriors was a model of efficiency, but over the millennia, a slow but steady deterioration has occurred in some of their implants. Although the oculobe, Lamarin's organ, and omophagia perform well in new initiates, over time they lose their effectiveness. These deficiencies have been addressed where possible by the use of augmetics, so that it is common for veteran Iron Warriors to be fitted with bionic eyes, and to rely heavily upon information from their armor's auto-senses. An implant which has shown no sign of degradation over the millennia is the Catalespian node, which allows the brain to stay alert for long periods and reduces the need for sleep. Given their extensive duties as garrison troops, this is a vital survival trait, as an Iron Warrior without a finely honed ability to stay alert to the approach of enemies would not live long enough to pass on his gene seed to the next generation. As for their battle cry, for 10,000 years, the Iron Warriors' battle cry has been Iron Within, Iron Without, which symbolizes the Iron Warriors' rigid, unbending will and the thick armor with which they surround themselves. No matter how you look at it, they're still trench diggers.